Imagine this scene. The absolutely breathtaking wilderness of central Idaho. You've got towering peaks, these ancient forests, rivers just full of life. But beneath that stunning surface, well, there's a really complex story brewing. It's one that has pitted economic opportunity against environmental preservation for, gosh, generations now. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Stibnite Gold Mine. And this isn't just about digging for metals, it's really a collision. History, national security, that environmental legacy we mentioned, and crucially, Indigenous rights.
Oh, absolutely. The Stibnite Gold Project is it's a fascinating case study, so many layers. Our mission today really is to unpack its story. We'll look at its critical role back in wartime, the pretty significant environmental footprint it left behind, and then this ambitious and, let's be honest, highly controversial plan to reopen it today.
Yeah, and we've pulled together quite a stack of sources. They paint a really compelling picture, giving us insight from, well, all sides. You'll hear the perspective from the company Perpetua Resources. They argue they're here to clean up the past damage and secure vital minerals for the U.S. But then we'll also bring in the voices of conservation groups and the Nez Perce tribe, and they're raising some serious alarms about potentially irreversible harm to truly special part of the country. So get ready. There are some surprising facts here, some really thought-provoking insights as we unearth the layers of this story for you. Okay, so let's start by stepping back a bit. To really get this, we need to understand Idaho's deep roots in mining. I mean, they call it the gem state for a reason, right? Gold was first discovered there way back in 1860. And get this, between 1860 and 1866, Idaho produced something like 19% of all U.S. gold. That's huge. And this wasn't just, a few prospectors hitting it lucky. It fundamentally shaped Idaho's identity, led to a massive population boom, established towns like Boise, Idaho City, Wallace. The list goes on.
And what's really interesting there is how the type of gold actually shaped those early communities.
Right.
A lot of the gold, especially in the Snake River area, was, well, they called it excessively fine, which meant it wasn't very profitable for many of the white miners. So you saw this shift. By 1870, Chinese miners who were willing to work for lower wages actually formed the majority in some areas. They often worked claims others had passed over. It really highlights the economic and social dynamics that were already at play back then.
Right. So as those easy-to-get gold deposits started to play out, the focus shifted pretty quickly, didn't it, to other minerals?
Yeah.
Yeah, by the late 1800s, they found silver, lead, zinc over in the Coeur d'Alene area. That became the famous Silver Valley. And it wasn't just a silver hub. It became one of the most productive globally. We're talking over 1 billion ounces of silver historically. Even today, Idaho's a major player. Almost 45% of all U.S. silver comes from there. It just shows you the state's enduring mineral wealth.
And this is but all that intensive mining, especially before anyone was really thinking about modern environmental rules, it came at a huge cost. We're talking really severe water and air pollution. Take the smelter in Kellogg. For decades, it just pumped out hundreds of thousands of pounds of arsenic, cadmium, zinc straight into the air. Or look at the Blackbird mine. It produced copper, cobalt. But it became a Superfund site back in '83 because the contamination was so bad it completely wiped out Chinook salmon from Panther Creek by the early '60s. And cleanup efforts there, they've been going on since 1997 indefinitely. The key thing to grasp here is that this mineral wealth created immense, often unregulated environmental problems we're still dealing with.
And it wasn't just an environmental fallout, was it? The human side of it. The conditions workers faced were terrible. It led to some really dramatic moments in labor history. Yeah, the Coeur d'Alene mining district, it saw major conflicts, high risks, low pay. It boiled over. Two big miners' uprisings, 1892 and 1899. Things got violent. A mill was destroyed. People died. They even brought in martial law, locked up hundreds of miners. And that whole experience, that raw struggle, was basically the reason the Western Federation of Miners, the WFM, was formed in 1893. They even said later, famously, they were not ashamed of having been born in jail. It really paints a picture of the danger and the fight that defined those early years. Okay, so that's the backdrop. Really important context. Now let's zoom in on the Stibnite mine itself. This is the focus today. What made this particular site so critical, especially during World War II?
It's pretty incredible how quickly stibnite became absolutely vital for U.S. national security in World War II. It supplied, get this, over 90% of the nation's antimony and 65% of its tungsten. These were essential. Munitions, steel hardening, fire retardants. Antimony, for example, they used it to harden bullets. It was so strategic that the federal government actually stepped in, subsidized it, managed operations. They even let people substitute military service by working at the mine. That's how critical it was.
Wow.
And the reason was Japan's invasion of China. China was the world's biggest antimony producer, so suddenly there was this acute shortage. So operations at Stibnite just ramped up. 2047, they even diverted a major river to dig this giant open pit. By late 43, Stibnite was this booming town. 1,500 people, school, post office, even had the state's first X-ray machine at the hospital.
That is an incredible picture of wartime necessity just driving everything. So what happened after the war when that urgent demand just disappeared? What was the lasting impact on the site?
Well, predictably, the mine struggled. Profits weren't consistent after the Korean War. Demand faded. It closed by 52, basically abandoned by 1958. And all that intense mining, again, done largely before modern environmental laws, and left behind a really undeniable, significant environmental mess. We're talking open pits, contaminated waste rock, messed up fish habitats.
Right.
Over 10 million tons of mine tailings weren't stored properly. They just leached chemicals into the water. They dumped waste rock straight into streams, slowly releasing arsenic, other poisons into this pristine Idaho wilderness for decades before the EPA even existed. Yeah. And then wildfires made it worse, causing massive erosion that choked off salmon spawning areas. So to this day, it's a Superfund site. Still dealing with legacy pollution, water quality issues, high levels of antimony and arsenic. There's this one creek, the East Fork of Meadow Creek. They call it Blowout Creek because a dam failed there once. It's still a major source of sediment pouring into the Salmon River system. The core insight really is how national security needs can just explode activity in a remote place, create this intense industry, and leave behind this incredibly complex environmental legacy we're still trying to figure out.
Right. Okay, so fast forward to today. Now we have this company, Perpetua Resources. They used to be called Midas Gold, stepping into this very complex history. They want to redevelop the old Stibnite district. What exactly is their modern plan?
Okay, so their plan is based on conventional open pit mining. They want to extract gold, silver, and that critical antimony from three main pits: Hanger Flats, Yellow Pine, and West End. They estimate the mine could operate for about 15 years. And they project there's a lot there, about 4.8 million ounces of gold and 148 million pounds of antimony reserves.
Okay, so Perpetua and their supporters, they obviously make a strong case for why this is necessary. They talk about several benefits. Let's start with the economics. What kind of impact are they projecting for, rural Idaho?
They're talking about creating an average of around 550 jobs during the operational phase. That's a pretty big deal for that region, bringing significant investment. And it's a huge project financially. Perpetua's already secured, I think, $425 million in initial funding. But they're looking for up to $2 billion more in debt, potentially from places like the U.S. Export-Import Bank, XM, because the total construction cost is estimated at $2.2 billion. They also project their cost to produce gold will be very low, like among the lowest globally, so economically attractive from their perspective.
Okay, so jobs and investment. But a really big piece of their argument, especially lately, seems to be national security, right? The critical minerals angle. What's the strategic value they point to, especially with the antimony?
Yeah, this is where antimony really takes center stage in their narrative. Stibnite holds the only significant antimony reserve identified in the U.S., and it's one of the largest outside of Chinese control. Now, given that the U.S. imports something like 90% of its antimony, and China supplies over 60% of that, well, you can see the issue, especially with China putting in export controls recently and apparently even banning sales to the U.S. late last year. This makes a domestic source look really appealing.
Very timely.
Exactly. Perpetua estimates they could meet maybe up to 35% of U.S. antimony demand just in the first 6 years. And they specifically highlight this one compound, antimony trisulfide, from Stibnite. They say it's the only known domestic source that meets U.S. defense specs for a lot of munitions, small arms, missiles.
That's a powerful point, particularly with the current geopolitical climate. Okay, but another huge part of Perpetua's pitch is about cleaning up the mess, the environmental remediation. How do they plan to tackle that long-standing damage we talked about earlier?
Right, this is central to their proposal. They say they will actively address and remediate the legacy pollution from all that historical mining. That means removing, reprocessing, and then safely storing those millions of tons of old tailings and waste rock to improve water quality. They also plan to restore the natural flow of the East Fork-South Fork Salmon River, the EFFSR, and crucially, reopen fish passage to miles of spawning habitat that's been blocked for over 80 years by that old yellow pine pit.
80 years is a long time.
It is. And their own water quality models, they claim, predict lower antimony and arsenic levels in the surface water compared to now, at least at certain points, after the remediation and mining is done. They really emphasize the point that, hey, nobody else has stepped up to clean this massive site.
And it looks like they've gotten significant buy-in from the government on this plan. Can you tell us a bit about that support?
Absolutely. The federal backing has been Pretty substantial. We're talking $59.2 million in Defense Production Act funding, plus around $75 million in non-repayable awards from the Department of Defense. It's also been designated a transparency project under a recent executive order aimed at streamlining permits. It's on the Fast 41 dashboard, which is supposed to speed up big infrastructure projects.
So getting the green light, basically.
While getting expedited consideration. And Idaho has its own SPEED Act, which seems to support quicker permitting too. The really big one, though, was in May 2025. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers issued the Clean Water Act Section 404 permit. That was the final federal permit needed before they could really make construction decisions. And the Pentagon's stance is quite clear. They see this project as helping, quote, increase the resilience of our critical mineral supply chains while deterring adversarial aggression.
Okay, so that does paint a very compelling picture for Perpetua. You've got the economic argument, the national security angle, significant government backing, and this promise of major environmental cleanup. But as you'd expect with something this big in such a sensitive place, there's major pushback. Who are the main groups opposing this, and what are their biggest counterarguments? What really undermines Perpetua's vision for them?
Exactly. You've got a pretty wide coalition lined up against it, local and national conservation groups, Idaho Conservation League, Idaho Rivers United, Save the South Fork Salmon, Earthworks, American Rivers, Center for Biological Diversity, and very significantly, the Nez Perce tribe. They're all strongly opposing the Stibnite Gold project. And their concerns are, they're substantial. They cover a lot of ground.
Okay, let's dig into the environmental side first. Perpetua claims remediation benefits. What are the specific counter-arguments from conservation groups that challenge that? What makes them say it could actually be worse?
Well, the core argument from opponents is that this project will cause irreversible harm. They actually argue it could leave the site in worse shape than doing nothing. They point to the sheer scale, 3 massive new open pits. It would effectively double the disturbed area to over 3,200 acres. That's like, what, almost 2,500 football fields?
That's enormous.
It is. And it would generate 280 million tons of waste rock. Plus, they need to build this huge tailings dam 475 feet tall to hold 120 million tons of processed waste. One of those open pits would go down more than 720 feet below the riverbed of the East Fork South Fork Salmon River.
Below the riverbed.
Yeah. So critics say this fundamentally threatens critical habitat for federally protected fish, Chinook salmon, steelhead, bull trout, plus other wildlife like wolverines, whitebark pine. And the Forest Service itself has described that watershed, the South Fork Salmon River, as some of the most important remaining habitat for summer Chinook in the entire Columbia River Basin. That's significant. So the concerns are about heavy metal leaching, potential acid drainage, increased water temperatures, all things that harm fish. And here's maybe the kicker. These groups point out that the U.S. Forest Service's own analysis at one stage concluded that the no-action alternative, basically, leaving the site as is with ongoing legacy issues but no new mining, would actually be less environmentally damaging than Perpetua's plan, even with all the proposed mitigation.
Wow, the Forest Service said doing nothing might be better.
At one point in their analysis, yes. That finding is a major part of the lawsuit that these conservation groups in the Nez Perce tribe filed against the Forest Service, citing what they call significant flaws in the final mine plan approval.
That point about the no-action alternative being potentially less damaging is really striking.
Okay, so beyond the huge environmental footprint, there's also this debate about what the project really is. Is it about gold or antimony? How do critics frame that?
Yeah, this is a major point of contention. Critics argue forcefully that this is fundamentally a gold mine. They point out that gold is projected to make up something like 96% of the profits. Antimony, only about 4%.
96 versus 4%.
Right. So they question the whole strategic mineral narrative. They look at the numbers and say, okay, maybe there's a 3-year supply of antimony here, max. And any antimony they do mine still has to be shipped overseas for refining because the U.S. lacks that capacity. So they've labeled it a taxpayer-financed gold mine. And they bring up the 1872 mining law, this archaic law that lets companies take billions in valuable minerals from public lands without paying any royalties back to the American people.
That old law is still on the books. Still is. And maybe most revealingly, Perpetua's own Vice President of External Affairs, Mackenzie Lyon, reportedly acknowledged that they started emphasizing the antimony angle more as a, quote, tactical response to the Biden administration's focus on green energy to make the project seem more urgent. Meanwhile, one of their major investors, John Paulson, was apparently, quote, all about gold. So it raises real questions about the primary motivation. Is it national security or profit from gold.
And critically, what about the voice of the people who've lived on this land for generations, the Nez Perce tribe? What are their fundamental objections? How does this project impact their heritage, their future?
The Nez Perce tribe opposes this project vehemently. They state flatly that it violates foundational environmental laws and also the federal government's treaty obligations and trust responsibilities to the tribe. For them, the fish, the wildlife, all the resources in that area, they're not just resources, they call them treaty-reserved life sources that are absolutely central to the identity, the culture, the very well-being of the Nimipu people. They are deeply worried the mine will just cause more damage, potentially undoing decades of their own significant efforts to restore fish populations hammered by the impacts since World War II. So for the Nez Perce, this isn't just about the environment in an abstract way. It's about their culture, their history, their treaty rights, and what they see as a potential continuation of historical injustice.
Okay, so we have these very strong competing arguments. Perpetua has its final federal permit, but there's this lawsuit, ongoing state permitting. What does this all mean for the project actually moving forward? What are the next hurdles?
Well, you're right. That federal permit in May 2025 was a huge milestone for Perpetua. But they're not quite there yet. They still need to finalize the remaining state permits. And critically, they need to secure the full project financing that multi-billion-dollar package. Their target is to start construction maybe late 2025, aiming for production by 2028. But those dates absolutely depend on getting those state approvals and closing the financing deal. The Idaho Department of Environmental Quality is also putting out a preliminary draft permit, so there will be more public review and potential challenges there. And that lawsuit from the conservation groups and the Nez Perce tribe, that signals continued opposition and the potential for significant delays. It really highlights how complex and, frankly, often antiquated, as some call it, the U.S. permitting process is for these kinds of huge, controversial projects. The legal and financial fronts are definitely still active battlegrounds.
So we've really journeyed through a complex landscape today with the Stibnite Gold Project. We went from its vital role in a world war to this proposed future as potentially a source of critical minerals and a site for ambitious but very contested environmental cleanup. It's really clear this isn't just a story about one mine, is it? It feels like a microcosm of this much bigger national conversation we're having about resource extraction, about environmental protection, national security, and indigenous rights, all colliding in one place.
Absolutely. This deep dive really shows just how tightly woven together all these issues are. You feel those tensions so acutely in places like Stibnite. The push for economic opportunity, the strategic drive for domestic critical minerals versus the deep need to preserve our natural world, our cultural heritage. The echoes of history are just undeniable there.
So, what does this Stibnite story ultimately tell us? What does it reveal about the kind of balance we as a society choose to strike between fixing the pollution of the past, securing resources we think we need for the future, and protecting these incredibly fragile ecosystems for generations yet to come? Especially when you consider that analysis suggesting doing nothing might, just might, be less environmentally damaging than the proposed solution. It's a really tough question, and it echoes far beyond the mountains of Idaho, doesn't it? It invites all of us to think hard about the true cost and the true benefit of what we call progress and the choices we make for our shared future.